Hundreds of people are dead after an explosion at a Gaza hospital last night. The deadly blast sparked global outrage and immediate protest across the Middle East. Israel and Hamas blamed each other for the attack, but Israel says the Palestinian group Islamic Jihad is responsible. That organization was established in Gaza in the 1980s and is closely aligned with Hamas.
The ongoing war between Israel and Hamas has led to thousands of innocent civilian deaths, with more lives being lost as the battle rages on. Both sides continue to exchange strikes following the militant group's initial terrorist attack on Israeli civilians over a week ago, raising concerns about whether they are both in violation of international humanitarian law. So for more analysis, I want to bring in Robert Goldman. He's a professor at American University, Washington College of Law. He's also the faculty director of the War Crimes Research Office. Thank you so much for joining us. Sir, you know, when we knew you were coming on, I thought of the line, all is fair in love and war. And in fact, all is not fair in war. War has guidelines. There are laws when it comes to war. Can you outline what the Geneva Convention says about war as it relates to the fighting that we're seeing between Israel and Hamas?
Yeah, the fundamental instruments that govern the conduct of conflicts are quite old. We have the Geneva Conventions of 1949 that seek to protect so-called victims, such as civilians, prisoners of war. And then we have other law, like the Hague Conventions and additional protocols, which now articulate clear-cut restraints and prohibitions. And foremost among those is that civilians and the civilian population cannot be directly attacked. The only circumstance wherein a civilian can be attacked is if they assume the role of a combatant. Otherwise, they cannot be directly targeted, nor can, for instance, civilian objects, such as hospitals, be purposefully attacked. The law, however, envisions that civilians may become what we call collateral damage. And that is in an attack that is directed against a military target, which qualifies as such. The law envisions that a proportionate amount of civilians may be killed if that formula, if the deaths and destruction of civilian objects is not excessive in relation to the importance of the target and its destruction. So it is a delicate balance, which I must say that is made all the more difficult in fighting in the most densely populated real estate in the world, which is Gaza.
And so, Professor, you mentioned the Geneva Conventions and the additional protocols that were put in place in the 70s. Many of these rules of engagement were put into place after World War II. As we know, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on civilian populations in Japan. But even after that, in the 1960s and 70s, the United States engaged in a type of warfare in Southeast Asia that perhaps might have fallen under infringement of these Geneva Convention laws and regulations. So the question becomes, what are the consequences when you violate those laws? Because oftentimes what we see is people who violate those laws, in other words, leaders or military leaders, are in recent years are often from smaller countries and not, you know, the superpowers and those that, you know, have actually are the ones that came up with the rules.
Yeah, well, it's a very good question. And foremost, what you need to understand is the law of war presupposes that you are going to have a vigorous command structure within your military that will prevent and prosecute violations by your own troops. The United States actually did this, you may recall, in Vietnam with, I believe it was Lieutenant Calley and a variety of others that committed a horrible massacre.
At My Lai.
At My Lai, that's exactly right. And they were prosecuted, and I believe Richard Nixon, when he was president, pardoned them, which is something that shouldn't have happened. We have had progress since, as you know, we had the Nuremberg trials and so forth, but as a result of the horrors in Yugoslavia, the Security Council set up a tribunal to try those most responsible for war crimes, crimes against humanity in Yugoslavia. And then we had for Rwanda, and we've had other chambers. Now we have the International Criminal Court. In addition to the International Criminal Court, there have been a substantial amount of prosecutions that have taken place on what is known as universal jurisdiction. And that means that any state in the world that is a party to the Geneva Conventions can try a person who is accused of committing war crimes or crimes against humanity within their own domestic courts. And this has happened with some frequency. So there may be the possibility that the law can be upheld. You point out rightly, though, as you know, the International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for Putin. But Russia's a nuclear state. It's going to be, the court does not have a police force. But what is not possible today may be possible tomorrow. I don't think Milosevic in Yugoslavia or Charles Taylor in Liberia ever thought that they would have been handed over for prosecution to the International Criminal Court. They both were. And so circumstances may change in Russia. We don't know. But the key thing is the parties themselves must in good faith apply the law. And I would repeat again, the difficulties of fighting in urban warfare and undertaking bombardments and so forth in an area like
Professor.
Yeah.
Can I just sort of springboard off of what you are saying right now? You mentioned that the laws take into account the possibility of collateral damage. We're talking about civilians. And you're right. Gaza is densely populated. It also has a fence around it. We're talking about a war zone that is contained, and people do not have the option to leave the war zone. And then, Israel's challenge, according to them, is that Hamas is embedded within the civilian population, that they have tunnels underneath, that they're hiding military hardware in civilian buildings.
Which are prohibited to directly target.
Right, exactly. So that's exactly what I'm leading to, Vlad, is, does the law, and I don't know how, does the law cover the complexities of this, not just urban warfare, but this type of attack?
Yes, it does. But you cannot divorce it from the context and the scenario in which this is being fought. Any civilian object, a school, for example, an apartment building, if it is used to shield lawful targets of attack, it then becomes a military target. However, the attacking party does not have unlimited license. It must do a pre-attack calculus that will weigh the foreseeable damage to civilians, that is collateral damage, when weighed against the importance or the advantage that it's going to get from the destruction of that target. Quite clearly, the greater the importance of the target militarily, technically, the more there can be collateral damage, and it works the other way around. And so in the dynamics of warfare, something that could be protected as a civilian object could lose that protection, but the innocent civilian still retains protection from the law from becoming what we call excessive collateral damage. So the dynamics, as I said, this requires Israel to have very up-to-date target information. This is difficult because obviously Hamas will seek to conceal. It is well established that in the past, Hamas has used its civilian population to shield lawful targets of attack. You raise a very good point, however. The fact is the Israelis gave a warning that they were going to have an imminent ground operation, sea, air, and so forth, but principally ground in Gaza City. In other words, the city itself would become a target. And it told the people, 1 million people who are living, that they should go to the south. On the one hand, they discharge a responsibility, but it's kind of like having your cake and eating it too, because where do the people go the borders are closed. The Egyptians are not opening the border. And to top it off, the Israeli denial of the entry of foodstuffs, potable water, and so forth, make this even more difficult. So it really is a dreadful scenario
Professor,
for all of the parties.
Professor Robert Goldman, fascinating discussion, sir. Thank you very much. It just sort of highlights the difficulties that the Israelis and the challenges that they face in trying to defend themselves and trying to decapitate a terrorist organization which is embedded in the population. And I guess the point of this discussion is it's not very black and white. There's so much nuance when it comes to this. And oftentimes what you hear from people who just react viscerally to the images that they're seeing or the reporting tends to be sort of black and white. And as you just indicated, Professor, there's a lot of nuance there. So we thank you for helping us make sense of it.
Delighted to be with.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.